The Dragon Emperor was feared across the galaxy. Entire star systems trembled when his name was spoken. His wings were larger than warships, his fire could melt steel, and his voice alone could command armies. To dragons, he was not just a ruler. He was living proof of their strength, their pride, their unbroken tradition. But even the strongest ruler has a secret. In the deepest chamber of the royal palace, hidden behind layers of gold and stone, lay the emperor's most guarded treasure. It was not a weapon. It was not gold. It was not even the throne itself. It was his newborn son. The child of the mighty emperor should have been a symbol of glory, a future king, a dragon who would inherit fire and fury. But this baby was different. His wings were too small, his scales too soft, and his heart too weak. He struggled to breathe. Even the palace healers whispered that the child might not live long. The emperor, the strongest of all dragons, stood in silence before the crib. His golden eyes burned with anger and sorrow. He wanted to roar at the stars, to tear the universe apart. How could his son, the heir of the greatest empire, be born so weak? And yet, when the baby coughed, when the small claws reached out, the emperor felt something he had never known before. Fear. Not fear of enemies, not fear of death. Fear of losing this fragile life. Still, the empire could not know. To dragons, weakness was shame. A weak heir could destroy respect. Rivals would laugh, enemies would strike. So the emperor hid the truth. He let only a few trusted guardians watch the boy. To the world, the heir was safe and strong. But in reality, every day was a battle for the tiny dragon to live. One night, the palace was silent. The moons of the dragon homeworld shone silver light over the towers. Inside the chamber, the baby struggled again. His small chest rose and fell with effort. The emperor leaned close. His massive body curled like a shield around the fragile prince. Suddenly, the silence was broken. A distant alarm. Then another. A deep, echoing horn shook the palace walls. The air trembled. From the high towers, flames shot into the night sky. The emperor's heart froze. Enemies. The palace guards roared to life. Blades clashed. Soldiers rushed through the halls. Strange shadows moved in the dark. Creatures not of dragon kind. An unknown alien force had broken through the defenses. The emperor rose in fury, wings spreading wide. His roar split the night. But before he could strike, he looked once more at the crib. The baby coughed weakly, too fragile to move. For the first time in his reign, the emperor hesitated. He could crush the attackers, yes. But if they reached his son before he returned, the heir would die. He ordered his generals, "Protect the heir with your lives. Not a single enemy may reach him." Then, with fire blazing, he stormed out to meet the invaders. Chaos consumed the palace. The alien force was strange. Shadows of metal and smoke. Tall figures with sharp weapons that glowed like burning stars. They fought with no fear, cutting through dragon soldiers with deadly speed. The palace walls shook with explosions. In the nursery chamber, the guards fought bravely. But one by one they fell. The enemies pushed closer. The baby dragon cried out, his small voice almost drowned by battle. The guards knew they could not hold the room for long. And then, something unexpected happened. A human girl appeared. She was small, fragile compared to dragons. Her steps were quick, her breath heavy. She had no weapon, no armor. She was not even part of the royal guard. By all logic, she should have run away, hidden, saved herself. But she did not. Instead, she ran toward the sound of the crying baby. The last surviving guard fell with a roar, his body collapsing across the floor. The aliens stormed in. Their glowing blades reflected in the baby's frightened eyes. The girl leapt forward. Without thinking, without fear, she threw herself over the crib. Her arms wrapped around the baby dragon, shielding him with her small, human body. The aliens froze for a moment, surprised. A human? Protecting a dragon heir? The girl's voice shook, but it was steady enough. "You will not touch him." The enemies raised their weapons anyway. She shut her eyes, ready to die. At that exact moment, the emperor returned. His wings slammed against the chamber doors, tearing them apart. His roar was thunder. Fire filled the hall, swallowing the invaders in a storm of burning light. Ash and smoke fell like black snow. When the flames cleared, the Emperor's eyes locked on the crib. And there he saw it. The human girl, trembling, smoke rising around her clothes. Her arms still wrapped protectively around his weak son. The baby dragon pressed against her, still alive, still breathing. The Emperor froze. His enemies lay dead. The palace still burned. But all he could see was this fragile human, who had done what even his strongest warriors had failed to do. She had saved the heir. A human, a weak, powerless creature. The Emperor's mind raged with questions. Why would she protect his son? Why would she risk her life? Was it chance or something more? For the first time in his life, the Dragon Emperor felt something stranger than fear. He felt doubt, because at that moment, it was not dragon fire, not dragon strength, not dragon pride that had saved the heir. It was the courage of a human girl, and nothing in his world would ever be the same again. The throne room of the Dragon Emperor was silent. Hours had passed since the attack. The palace still smelled of smoke and blood. The walls bore scars of battle, but the child, the weak dragon prince, was alive. He breathed softly, curled inside the arms of the strange human girl. The Emperor stood over her like a mountain of fire and shadow. His golden eyes narrowed. He could not understand what he was seeing. This human should have fled. She should have saved her own life. Instead, she had thrown herself into danger for his fragile heir. Why? The Emperor's generals entered. Their scales burned, their weapons stained with blood. They froze when they saw the girl. Murmurs rose in the room. A human? One hissed. She dares to touch the heir? Another growled. Kill her before she brings shame to the throne, a third demanded. But the Emperor raised his claw, silencing them. The girl looked up. Her face was pale, her body shaking, but her arms did not move from around the baby dragon. She held him as if he were her own child. The generals sneered. To them, humans were weak, fragile beings. In dragon culture, humans were little more than servants. That such a creature had touched the prince was insulting, even disgusting. Yet the Emperor could not forget what he had seen. His generals had failed. His warriors had fallen. But this small human had stood between death and his heir. The girl finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I only wanted to protect him. The Emperor's gaze hardened. You risked your life? For a dragon? For the heir of your enemy? The girl swallowed hard, but she did not look away. He is just a baby. He did nothing to me. He does not deserve to die. The hall erupted in anger. Dragons slammed their tails against the stone floor. To them, her words were madness. Protecting a weak child was foolish enough, but protecting the heir of their empire? A human should have rejoiced at the chance to see a dragon prince fall. Lies, a general roared. She is a spy, another accused. Let me tear her apart and end this insult. The Emperor's wings unfolded slightly, silencing them again. His voice was calm but sharp as a blade. Enough! He stepped closer to the girl, his shadow covering her completely. The heat of his body pressed against the air. Any other creature would have fainted from fear, but the girl only held the baby tighter. What is your name? The Emperor asked. The girl hesitated. Lena. Lena, the Emperor repeated slowly, as if testing the sound of it. You understand what you have done? By touching the heir, by shielding him with your life, you have broken every law of my empire. Her breath caught, but she nodded. Yes. And still, you chose to protect him? The girl's eyes lowered to the baby dragon resting in her arms. His tiny claws had curled around her sleeve, as if holding on for dear life. She gave a faint, sad smile. Yes, because life, even a weak life, deserves a chance. The Emperor's chest rumbled with a low growl. Her words echoed in his mind, clashing with everything he believed. Dragons valued strength above all. Weakness was death. Mercy was weakness. That was the law of their kind, the truth that had built their empire. And yet this human, fragile as glass, had stood unbroken in the face of death. The generals stepped forward again, their voices full of fury. "She mocks our laws, my emperor. She is human filth. She should die here now." One raised his blade, but the emperor's roar thundered through the chamber, shaking the very stones. "No one touches her," he commanded. The hall fell silent. The generals lowered their heads, but their eyes still burned with anger. They could not understand their ruler's decision. Why spare her? Why protect a human? The emperor himself did not fully understand. He only knew that when he had seen his son wrapped in her arms, something inside him had shifted, something he could not yet name. Later that night, the emperor returned to the nursery. The baby slept peacefully, his chest rising with steady breaths. Lena sat beside the crib, her head bowed in exhaustion. The emperor spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You could have run. You could have lived. Why sacrifice yourself for a creature who would never have done the same for you?" Lena looked up at him. Her eyes were tired, but not afraid. "Because someone has to break the chain," she whispered. "My people suffered under dragon rule. I know your kind call us weak. Maybe we are weaker than you in body. But strength is not only fire and claws. Strength is also the choice to protect, even when it costs you everything." The emperor froze. No dragon had ever spoken to him this way. And yet, this human dared. He said nothing more. But when he left the chamber, his steps were slower than usual. His mind burned with thoughts. The next day, the court gathered. Dragons filled the throne hall, their scales shining like armor, their wings folded with pride. The generals presented their demand. The human must die. It is the only way to erase the shame of her touch. The emperor sat upon his throne, silent. His gaze swept over the crowd, then to the small figure of Lena, standing at the center. She did not tremble, though she knew the weight of their hatred. Finally, the emperor rose. His wings spread, his shadow filling the room. His voice shook the pillars. "No, she will live." Gasps filled the hall. The generals bowed their heads in anger, but they dared not disobey. The emperor looked at Lena once more. In his golden eyes, something strange flickered. Something between anger, respect, and confusion. He had not yet decided what she meant for the future of his son, or for his empire. But one thing was certain. This human girl, this fragile creature, had changed everything. And though he did not yet admit it, deep in his heart he knew, this was only the beginning. The dragon palace stood proud once more, but inside its walls, whispers spread like fire. Word of the human girl had already reached every corner of the empire. The heir was saved by a human? Is it true the emperor protects her? Shameful, dangerous, unnatural. Dragons were creatures of tradition. They believed only the strong had the right to survive. And now, the story of a weak heir and a human savior was shaking the very foundation of that belief. In the throne hall, the emperor sat upon his seat of black stone, his golden eyes scanning the court. His generals, advisors, and nobles had gathered, their wings folded, their scales gleaming under torchlight. At the center stood Lena, small, fragile, with nothing but her simple clothes. She did not belong in such a place. Around her, dragons whispered with scorn. "Look at her, so weak. She dares to stand where warriors stand. Let us end this insult now." The emperor raised his claw for silence. The hall grew still. He spoke in a low, commanding voice. "This human saved my son. She will not be harmed." His words echoed through the hall, but instead of peace, they stirred anger. A noble dragon stepped forward, scales crimson like blood. His eyes glared at Lena with pure hatred. "My emperor," he said, "our laws are clear. Weakness must not be protected. This girl has touched the air. She brings shame to the bloodline. If you will not punish her, then you insult all of us." Murmurs of agreement rose. Tails slammed against the stone floor. The court demanded tradition. The emperor's gaze burned. "Would you prefer the heir had died? The noble hesitated, but pride forced his answer. Better an heir die with honor than live with the touch of a human. A growl rippled from the emperor's throat, silencing the hall. But before he could respond, Lena spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the chamber. Honor means nothing to a child who cannot even take his first steps. Life matters. He deserved to live. That is why I protected him. The hall erupted. Dragons roared in outrage. To them, her words were blasphemy. A human challenging dragon law? Impossible. Arrogant creature. Kill her now. She dares to speak of life to dragons? But Lena did not back down. She lifted her chin, her eyes steady. You think strength is everything. But what did your strength do that night? Failed. Your warriors fell. Your fire could not save him. Only courage saved him. My courage. The emperor's claws dug into the stone throne. He felt his chest tighten. Her words cut deep not only to his generals but to himself. Because he knew she spoke truth. It was not dragon fire that had saved the air. It was her. The court raged, but the emperor raised his voice like thunder. Enough! The hall shook. Silence fell again. He looked down at Lena, his eyes fierce, but not unkind. You speak boldly for one so fragile. But know this, every word you say places you in danger. Dragons do not forgive insult easily. Lena met his gaze without fear. I do not care if they hate me. I care that your son lives. The emperor said nothing. His generals growled low, frustrated. Days passed, but the tension did not fade. Dragons whispered in the halls, their anger rising. Some demanded the human's execution. Others feared what her presence meant. Could the emperor himself be changing? Meanwhile, in the nursery, the weak air grew stronger. His tiny wings twitched, his eyes shone brighter. And always Lena was there. She fed him, sang softly to him, comforted him when he cried. The baby dragon began to recognize her voice more than anyone else's. He reached for her when he was afraid. He curled against her when he slept. The emperor watched in silence, hidden in the shadows. His heart burned with conflict. Every instinct told him this was wrong. His son should be surrounded by strength, not weakness. But each day he saw the boy live, and he could not deny it was because of her. One evening, the emperor walked into the nursery. Lena sat beside the crib, stroking the baby's head. She looked up as he entered, but did not move away. The emperor stood tall, his wings folded. His voice was low, almost thoughtful. You speak of courage. You speak of life. But do you understand what you have done? By saving him, you have changed his path forever. He will grow with your touch upon him. My court already whispers. They say he will become soft human. Lena's eyes did not waver. Maybe soft is not weakness. Maybe kindness is another kind of strength. The emperor's gaze burned brighter. Dragons do not rule with kindness. Maybe that is why so many fear you, Lena answered quietly. But your son will one day be emperor. Do you want him to be feared or respected? The emperor froze. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No dragon, no general, no advisor. Only this fragile human girl dared. Later, in the council hall, the generals gathered again. My emperor, one said, bowing deeply. This cannot continue. The girl's influence is dangerous. She speaks poison. Already the people whisper. If you allow this, your empire will weaken. The emperor's wings spread wide, his shadow falling over them all. His voice thundered. Do not forget who holds this empire together. Do not forget who destroyed the invaders. I decide what weakens us and what strengthens us. The generals bowed, but their eyes still burned with anger. That night, the emperor stood alone on the palace balcony. Stars burned bright in the endless sky. He thought of his empire, his people, his son. And he thought of Lena's words. Strength is not only fire and claws. Strength is also the choice to protect. He closed his eyes, his chest heavy with doubt. For the first time in his reign, he wondered if the traditions of dragons might be wrong. And deep in the shadows of the galaxy, enemies waited, watching, preparing. Soon, the emperor would be forced to choose between the pride of his people and the strange new strength he had seen in a human girl. The palace slowly healed after the attack. Broken halls were rebuilt, burned walls were repaired, and guards now patrolled day and night. But inside, a quieter change was taking place, something no dragon could fully explain. The weak air, once so fragile, was beginning to grow stronger. His breaths came easier. His wings twitched with energy. His eyes glowed brighter each day. And at the center of this change was Lena, the human girl. Every morning, she entered the nursery with calm steps. She carried no weapons, no treasures, no power. Yet the baby dragon lifted his head the moment he heard her voice. His tiny claws reached for her. She would smile softly, lifting him into her arms, humming a tune in her human tongue. The sound was strange, gentle, unlike any dragon song. But the baby listened, his eyes heavy with peace. The nurses of the court watched with shock. They whispered among themselves, "Why does he respond to her? Dragons are not meant to bond with humans. This is dangerous. This is unnatural." But no matter their words, the truth was clear. The air was living, growing, because of her. One afternoon, the emperor himself stepped into the nursery. His massive form filled the doorway, his shadow falling over the room. Lena did not bow. She simply held the baby close and looked up at him. The emperor's golden eyes studied her. Then his son. For a long time he said nothing. Finally, his voice rumbled low. "He laughs with you." Lena blinked. "Yes, he does." The emperor tilted his head. "He never laughed before." A silence followed. Lena stroked the baby's head gently. Maybe he needed more than power around him. Maybe he needed love. The word love sounded strange in the emperor's ears. Dragons spoke of fire, strength, battle, and glory, but rarely of love. He turned away, but the word remained in his mind. As days passed, the bond grew deeper. The baby dragon began to mimic Lena. When she clapped her hands, he tried to stretch his small claws the same way. When she laughed, a tiny growl-like laugh escaped his mouth. At night, when storms rumbled over the palace, the child cried in fear. No dragon guard could calm him. But the moment Lena entered, her hand on his back, the crying stopped. Even the emperor noticed. Once, he came to see his son during a storm. He found Lena sitting by the crib, whispering a story in her simple human words. The boy's eyes slowly closed, his breathing soft and steady. The emperor stood in the shadows unseen, and for the first time in centuries, he felt peace. But the court did not feel peace. In the council chamber, the generals and nobles gathered again. Their voices were sharp, their anger boiling. "This is an insult. The heir is becoming too attached to her. He learns weakness instead of strength." One general slammed his tail against the floor. "My emperor, the boy is your blood. He must learn the ways of dragons, not humans. If this continues, he will grow soft. And a soft heir will never rule." The emperor's eyes narrowed. His voice was quiet, but heavy as stone. "And yet he lives. Would you prefer him dead, as you once said?" The hall grew silent. No one dared answer. Still, unease spread among them. Tradition was their foundation, and now it was being shaken by one fragile human girl. That evening, the emperor confronted Lena directly. He found her in the nursery again, the baby asleep in her arms. "You know what they say," he growled. "They claim you make him weak, that you are turning him into something less than a dragon." Lena looked at the child's sleeping face, then back at the emperor. Her voice was calm, but firm. "Do you truly believe that? Look at him. He was dying. Now he lives. Is that weakness?" The emperor's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue. He wanted to roar that dragons did not need humans. But his eyes fell on his son, the tiny chest rising, the claws curling softly in sleep. And he had no answer. Days turned into weeks. The bond between the girl and the heir only grew. She taught him to play, to listen, even to share. She gave him small lessons in patience, lessons dragons often ignored. The emperor watched from afar, his heart torn. He saw his son grow stronger. He saw laughter where once there was silence. He saw courage in the way the boy tried to copy her, even when he stumbled. But he also saw the danger. The court's whispers grew louder. If the people began to believe the heir was human-touched, his rule could be threatened. Rivals could rise. Enemies could strike. The emperor stood between two worlds, tradition and change, pride and survival, fire and love. One night, he called Lena to the balcony where stars burned above the empire. "You have given him life," he admitted. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "But you also bring danger. The court will not accept this bond. They will strike at you, perhaps even at him." Lena's eyes lifted to the stars. Her voice was soft, yet certain. "Then let them strike. I will still protect him, even if it costs me my life." The emperor's chest rumbled with conflict. He had crushed empires, burned armies, broken kings. Yet this fragile human girl spoke without fear, and it unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. He turned his gaze to the stars. His wings trembled slightly, though he hid it well. For deep inside he knew she was right. The heir's survival had already changed everything, and the future was no longer clear. In the shadows of the galaxy, distant enemies stirred once more. Watching, waiting. The day was coming when the bond between a human girl and a dragon prince would be tested by fire and war. And the emperor, proud and unbending, would be forced to decide what truly made a ruler strong. The galaxy never forgets weakness. Weeks after the attack, the dragon palace stood rebuilt, stronger than before. Yet far beyond the stars, in the cold silence of space, an old enemy gathered its strength. The same alien force that had once breached the emperor's homeworld now returned. Greater, sharper, hungrier for victory. This time they did not come to steal. They came to conquer. The warning reached the emperor at dawn. Messengers burst into the throne hall, their scales scorched from battle at the outer rim. "My emperor," one cried, "the invaders are coming. Entire fleets of metal and fire. They cut through our outposts like paper. They march for the heart of the empire." The court roared in anger. Wings spread wide, claws scraped stone. Dragons demanded war, demanded fire and blood. The emperor rose from his throne, his wings stretching across the chamber like golden storms. His voice thundered. "Then we will meet them with fire. Let them burn in the fury of dragons." The hall shook with cheers. The empire would go to war once more. But deep inside, the emperor felt unease. He remembered the first attack, the way his guards had fallen, the way even his fire had struggled. And he remembered who had truly saved his heir. A human girl. Before the war council, the emperor visited the nursery. The weak prince was stronger now, though still small. His eyes burned brighter, his wings stretched wider. And as always, Lena was there beside him. The child gurgled happily when he saw her, claws reaching for her hair. Lena laughed softly, then noticed the emperor's shadow. Her smile faded. She could see the weight in his golden eyes. "They are coming again, aren't they?" she asked. The emperor nodded. "Yes, stronger than before. They will test us. They will test me." Lena's gaze fell to the baby dragon. She stroked his head gently. "Then they will test him, too. His future depends on what happens now." The emperor stared at her. His pride wanted to reject her words, to claim that only dragons would decide the battle. But another voice whispered inside him. A voice he did not like to admit existed. A voice that said she was right. The war began at the edge of the empire. Dragon fleets clashed with alien ships, fire against steel, wings against engines. The sky burned with explosions. Worlds trembled under the fury of battle. At first, the dragons pushed forward. Their roars shook the stars. Their flames melted enemy hulls. But the aliens were many, too many. They adapted. Their weapons grew sharper, their shields stronger. Soon, the war reached the emperor himself. His flagship soared into battle, larger than a mountain, covered in golden armor. He fought at the front, his fire consuming dozens of ships. His generals followed, their roars shaking the void. But even his power was not enough. For every enemy ship destroyed, 3 more appeared. Slowly, painfully, the dragons were being overwhelmed. Back in the palace, Lena stood at the war table. Generals glared at her presence, but she ignored them. She studied the moving lights of the battlefield, her brow furrowed. "You are fighting their strength with your strength," she said. "That is why you are losing." The generals hissed. "Silence, human. You have no right to speak of war. What could a weak creature like you know of battle?" But Lena did not flinch. She pointed at the map. "They expect your fire. They expect your claws. But they do not expect cunning. Look here at the supply lines. Strike there and their fleet will starve. Attack their leader's command ship, and the rest will scatter." The dragons laughed. "Cowards' tricks," they sneered. "Not the way of warriors." But the emperor, silent until now, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed as he studied the map. Her words made sense. More sense than the endless fire his generals demanded. He growled, low and thoughtful. "Perhaps wisdom can be a weapon, too." The hall fell silent. Dragons stared in shock. Their emperor, the strongest of all, had spoken in favor of a human's plan. The next battle came swiftly. This time, the dragons did not charge headlong. Instead, they moved like shadows, striking not at the strongest ships but at the weakest points. Supply vessels exploded in flames. Command channels were disrupted. Confusion spread through the alien fleet. And when the enemy flagship appeared, the emperor himself descended upon it. His fire melted its shields. His claws tore its metal apart. But just as the ship cracked, an ambush was revealed. Dozens of hidden enemy ships surrounded him, their weapons blazing. The emperor roared, fire spilling into the void. But even he felt his strength falter. It was Lena's strategy, sent through the war table, that saved him. She had predicted the ambush, guided a smaller fleet to strike from behind. The enemies broke, scattering in chaos. For the first time, the invaders fell back. The empire had hope, but the battle was not yet won. The aliens regrouped, preparing for one last assault. One that would decide the fate of the empire. The emperor knew he would face them again, and this time, perhaps even his fire would not be enough. He returned to the palace before the final battle. He stood before Lena, his face scarred from combat, his scales burned, but his eyes blazing with something new. "You were right," he admitted. The words tasted strange in his mouth. "Your wisdom saved us. Your courage saved me." Lena shook her head. "Not me. Him." She pointed to the baby dragon, sleeping peacefully. "Everything I do is for him, because he deserves a future." The emperor looked at his son. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a heavy voice, he whispered, "Then we fight not only for the empire, we fight for his tomorrow." The stars prepared to burn once more. The final clash was coming. The emperor, the human girl, and the weak heir would soon face the greatest test of all. And the galaxy would learn that sometimes, strength is not only fire and claws, but also the courage to change. The final battle came like a storm. The alien armada stretched across the stars, a sea of metal and shadow. Their weapons burned brighter than suns. Their numbers dwarfed even the might of dragons. And at the heart of it all, their massive flagship waited, a beast of steel, pulsing with dark power. The dragon emperor soared at the front of his fleet, golden wings cutting through the void. His roar shook the stars, his fire split the darkness. Behind him, his armies followed, their scales blazing with fury. This was the battle that would decide everything. The empire, his people, his son's future. At first, the war went as expected. Dragons clashed with ships, fire against steel, claw against cannon. The void became chaos, a battlefield of screams and light. But then the enemy revealed their true weapon. From the heart of the flagship came a wave of energy, dark, heavy, crushing. It struck the dragons like chains, slowing their wings, dimming their fire. One by one, mighty warriors fell, drifting lifeless into the void. The emperor fought against the pull, roaring with fury. but even he felt his strength falter. Fire sputtered from his throat. His claws grew heavy. For the first time in centuries, the Emperor felt defeat close around him. Far away in the palace, Lena watched the war table. Her hands trembled as the lights of dragon ships blinked out one by one. "They're dying," she whispered. "He's dying." The generals sneered. "He chose this path. He will fight until his last breath. That is the way of dragons." But Lena slammed her hand against the table. "No, that is the way of death. If you keep fighting like this, you will lose everything." The generals roared in outrage, but her voice cut through. "Listen to me. Strike at the source. That energy comes from their flagship. Destroy it, and your emperor will rise again." The room went silent. For a moment, no dragon moved. Then, slowly, the order was given. Fleets turned. Dragons shifted formation. They followed her plan. Out in the void, the emperor struggled. His golden wings hung heavy, his fire dimmed. Around him, enemy ships closed in for the kill. Then, like sparks in the dark, dragon fleets moved, breaking formation, weaving past enemy fire. They struck not at the ships around them, but at the heart of the enemy flagship. The aliens were unprepared. Explosions shook their command vessel. The dark energy flickered. The chains weakened. The Emperor felt it, the weight lifting, his fire surging back. His golden eyes blazed once more. With a roar that split the stars, he hurled himself at the flagship. His claws tore through steel. His fire melted its core. The ship exploded in a storm of light, flames spreading across the void. The enemy fleet, leaderless and broken, scattered in chaos. Dragons hunted them down, their roars echoing across the stars. The Empire was saved. Silence returned to space, broken only by the crackle of burning wrecks. The Emperor floated among the ruins, his chest heaving, his scales scorched. But his eyes burned with victory. Not only victory of fire, but victory of something new. He knew whose wisdom had guided that strike, whose courage had given him strength when his own had faltered. A human girl. When he returned to the palace, the dragons gathered to greet him. They roared his name, hailing him as conqueror, savior, emperor. Yet his eyes searched only for one face. He found her in the nursery, the weak prince in her arms. Lena looked up at him, unsure of what he would say. For a long moment, the Emperor only stood there, silent. Then his voice rumbled, softer than ever before. "It was your wisdom that saved us. Without you, we would have fallen." The court froze in shock. An emperor admitting reliance on a human? Impossible. Yet the words had been spoken, and none could deny the truth. The emperor stepped closer. His gaze fell upon his son, alive, stronger than ever, looking back at him with bright eyes. Then he turned to Lena. "From this day forward," he declared, his voice echoing through the halls, "you are guardian of the air. No dragon shall harm you. No voice shall silence you. You saved my son. You saved my empire. And you have changed me." The court erupted in whispers, some in outrage, some in awe, but none dared challenge him. The emperor's wings spread wide, his golden scales gleaming. His voice thundered again. "Strength is not only fire and claws. Strength is also wisdom. Strength is also courage. And strength can be found, even in those we once called weak." The words rang through the palace like fire, shaking every heart that heard them. That night, the emperor stood on the balcony, stars stretching endless before him. The galaxy was quiet for now, but he knew peace never lasted forever. Enemies would rise again. Wars would come again. Yet for the first time he felt no fear of the future. Behind him, Lena sat with the young prince. The boy cooed happily, flapping his small wings, his eyes bright with life. He had survived. He had hope, and one day he would rule. The emperor turned his gaze to the stars and spoke softly, almost to himself. "The day will come when this boy, who was once weak, will decide the fate of the galaxy. And when that day comes, he will not rule as I did. He will rule as more." His golden eyes blazed, not with fire, but with something stronger.